It started small, tiny, barely noticeable. Her wedding ring was missing. I was rinsing out my coffee mug when I noticed the empty patch of marble on the counter, where she always left it while doing dishes. At first, I thought it had slipped behind something, so I checked around. Nothing. I stared at that empty space for a long time, a hollow feeling creeping through me. It wasn't like Emily to forget her routines. She was meticulous, predictable. That's when the first seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. I brushed it off as paranoia, but the thought burrowed deep, infecting every corner of my brain. By itself, it was nothing. But it wasn't the only thing. There were late nights, abrupt changes in her schedule, the way she sometimes looked at me, no, through me, when we talked. I told myself not to overthink it. Marriage has its ups and downs. We were busy, tired, distracted. It didn't mean anything, but it felt different. It wasn't just the missing ring. It was the absence of something I couldn't quite name, something I thought we'd always have. I pushed the feeling aside, but it lingered. Like a splinter I couldn't remove, it festered. I wasn't looking for proof. I didn't want it. It was a Saturday morning. She had gone out to run errands, and I was hunting for my car keys. I reached into the pocket of her coat, hanging lazily over the dining room chair, and felt something crumpled. The receipt. I unfolded it, expecting something innocuous. Groceries, dry cleaning, gas. My eyes skimmed the printed text, stopping dead on a single-line item. A night's stay at the Rosewood Inn. I stared at the receipt like it might burn me. The date was 2 weeks ago. A Friday. That night, she'd told me she was working late. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Business trip? A last-minute work meeting? But she would have told me. Wouldn't she? The Rosewood Inn was a boutique hotel tucked away an hour outside the city. I'd never been there. We'd never been there. I folded the receipt neatly, my hands trembling. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but the sickening weight in my stomach told me I already had. After the receipt, I couldn't stop seeing the signs. They were everywhere, staring me in the face, mocking me for not noticing them before. She started coming home later and later. When I asked, she'd smile that practiced, too-perfect smile and tell me she was catching up on work. Her phone, once left casually on the counter or coffee table, was now glued to her side, locked with a new password I didn't know. And then there were the small but telling details. A faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine clinging to her jacket. A new playlist on her phone with songs that sounded nothing like her usual taste. The worst was the lingerie. I found it when I was putting away laundry, a sleek black piece of lace, still with the tags on. I don't know what possessed me to check, but when I did, my heart sank. It wasn't in my size. She hadn't worn anything like that for me in years. Still, I said nothing. I was afraid of what I'd find if I looked too closely. I was afraid of the truth. I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that I was imagining things. But her lies were starting to unravel. One night, she told me she was meeting Sarah, her best friend, for dinner. I tried to push the nagging doubts aside, but they gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I called Sarah. The conversation was brief. Sarah hadn't seen Emily in weeks. When Emily came home that night, she was glowing, her cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. My stomach turned. The next day, I saw her texting someone, smiling at her phone as if the rest of the world didn't exist. I asked her about it, and she shrugged. Just work stuff, she said, her voice too casual. The lies were piling up, suffocating me. but I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. The moment I saw him, my world shattered. She told me she was meeting a colleague for drinks after work. Her tone was breezy, casual. Nothing out of the ordinary. But something inside me snapped. I waited 15 minutes after she left, grabbed my keys, and followed her. She didn't go to a bar. She drove to a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop on the edge of town. I parked a few spaces away, my hands gripping the wheel as I watched her get out of the car. And then he appeared. Tall, dark-haired, and confident in a way that set my teeth on edge. She smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile she used to save for me. When they hugged, it was like a punch to the gut. His hand lingered on her waist, and when they pulled apart, their eyes locked in a way that left no room for doubt. They got into his car and drove off. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I knew where they were going before we even got there. The Rosewood Inn. It was small, picturesque, the kind of place meant for romantic getaways, not business trips. I parked in the shadows and watched as they walked inside, her hand brushing against his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. My vision blurred as tears I didn't want to shed stung my eyes. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might break. For hours, I sat there, staring at the faint yellow glow of the window where they disappeared. I imagined them inside, laughing, touching, sharing secrets they'd never whispered to me. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally drove home, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, and I felt like I was dragging the weight of the entire world behind me. The next morning, she greeted me like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and asked me how I'd slept. I didn't answer. I tried to act normal, but the images of her and that man haunted me. Every time she smiled, I saw her smiling at him. Every time she touched me, I felt the phantom touch of her hands on his skin. I started avoiding her. Work became my refuge, the only place where I didn't feel like I was suffocating. But it wasn't enough. A week later, I found the second receipt. This time, it wasn't hidden. It was crumpled on the floor of her car, discarded like an afterthought. The same hotel. The same man. When she came home that night, I was waiting. The confrontation was brutal. She tried to deny it at first, her voice trembling as she told me I was imagining things, but the evidence was irrefutable, and she knew it. Eventually, the truth spilled out. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, that it was a mistake, that she still loved me, but her words felt hollow, like she was reading from a script. I asked her why. She didn't have an answer. She just cried, her tears pooling on the floor between us, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. She didn't beg me to stay. She didn't fight for us. And that, more than anything, broke me. The days after were a blur of paperwork and silence. We barely spoke as we divided up our lives. She moved out first, leaving the house empty and echoing with memories I didn't want to relive. The divorce was quick. There wasn't much to argue over. She didn't contest anything. It was like she'd already moved on before I even knew what was happening. I heard through mutual friends that she's still with him. They've been spotted together at restaurants, laughing, happy. The thought of it makes me sick. I wanted to hate her, but the truth is, I mostly hate myself for not seeing it sooner, for letting it happen. 6 months later, I'm still figuring out how to breathe again. The betrayal lingers, like a shadow that follows me everywhere. Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, my chest tight with the memory of her walking away. But I'm learning. Slowly, painfully, I'm learning. I've realized that the cracks were there long before the affair. I just didn't want to see them. I was so desperate to hold on to the life we'd built that I ignored the signs, telling myself it was normal, that we were just going through a rough patch. Now, I know better. Love isn't supposed to feel like walking on a tightrope, waiting for the inevitable fall. The scars are still fresh, but they're a reminder of what I've survived. One day, I'll be able to look back and see how far I've come. But for now, I'm just taking it one day at a time.